The potato harvest is in, and it's time to preserve the potatoes to last throughout the year. And for the first time ever, I'm going to can potatoes, and I'm going to be doing a canning duel. I'm going to try 2 different methods of canning, and I'm going to determine which method I like the best. So let's check it out. Come on. Hey friends, it's Barbara Sue from Kowalski Mountain, and welcome back to our channel. Philip and I are here full-time on the homestead, and I'm slowly getting settled in, a long way from it, but we're getting there. And I'm also trying to fit in jobs that need to get done because of the timetable. Ready or not, when the crops come in, they have to be put up to preserve the food so that we don't lose all of our hard work. Now, I've been kind of pushing the envelope on this one because our potatoes we dug during our September workation. Now, we've officially made the move to the homestead, and I'm finally getting this task done. It's been on my to-do list for far too long. Now, last night I peeled a pot of potatoes, and they've been soaking in water overnight. Now, today I'm going to cut these up into bite-sized pieces, and I'm going to can it. Now, I told you that I'm going to be doing a canning duel. So as you know, I am pretty straight-laced when it comes to my canning. I like to follow the USDA guidelines and make sure that I'm putting my food up in the safest manner possible. But one of the channels that I follow is Ruth Ann Zimmerman, and she is a former Mennonite. And her canning methods, she didn't learn from a USDA canning book. She learned from her mom and her grandma. And she preserves food the Mennonite way, which is decades old in its preservation method. And I'm really intrigued by her potato canning method. Now, she does a dry canning method with no water in the jars. Now, her method is really considered a rebel canning method. Because doesn't meet the USDA guidelines for safety. But decades of Mennonites have been eating dry canned potatoes, and I feel pretty confident that it's safe. Now, the first method that you're going to see is going to be the USDA canning method. I'm going to preserve half of them following the USDA guidelines, which includes putting water in the jars and canning them in that method. The other half of the potatoes, I am going to use Ruth Ann's Mennonite method of dry canning, and then we're going to decide which ones we like best. Now, I didn't bore you with peeling potatoes. I told Philip last night that I have decided that I can never go to prison because I do not enjoy peeling potatoes. But as I was doing that last night, really wanting to lay down, I was reminded of something Ruth Ann said in her video. Future me will appreciate present me for preserving these potatoes, when later I can come back, open a can of potatoes, and have meal in minutes. That reminded me to keep going when I don't feel like peeling potatoes. Now, the reason it was really cumbersome is because most of these potatoes are really small, which I picked the smaller ones. I didn't pick the smallest. The smallest I'm going to cook just quartered, not peeled. But I picked all the middle of the road potatoes that were not large but not small, that we could put up and use for other methods. Now, Philip really likes what he calls a breakfast skillet. It has potatoes in it, and it's kind of a cumbersome meal because of the potatoes. And making canned potatoes will speed that meal up a lot. Now, in my potatoes, I have 3 kinds of potatoes. There are red potatoes, Kennebec potatoes, which are our favorite, and also Yukon Gold. And I'm mixing them all together in my canned potatoes in one big batch. Now, right now, I'm just dicing up these potatoes into somewhat evenly sized pieces. And then we will get this project going. Now I'm going to be canning our potatoes in pint-sized jars because Philip and I are empty nesters, so we don't need a huge amount of potatoes at a time. Now if you have a larger family, you'll definitely want to do these in larger jars. Now some of the things you can do with canned potatoes, you can cook them up for breakfast, you can put them into a soup or a stew. They're already ready, they just have to really heat up. And it really speeds up the process of making dinner. You can also, if you just want cooked potatoes, maybe with your meal, you can dump them into a frying pan, fry them up a little bit, give them a little bit of color. They're ready to eat. Now some people don't peel their potatoes when they can them. I am. Just makes me feel better. Now last night after I peeled potatoes, I had them submerged in water and kept them completely submerged so they wouldn't change color, and just left them out on the counter overnight. Now the canning jars that I'm using today came from my grandma's house. My mom spent a lot of time cleaning things there, and she gave me a ton of canning jars. I know that my grandma didn't use them all. They were collectors, but it makes me think of her today as I'm canning potatoes to be using the canning jars that came from her. All right, they are all cut. So now I'm going to divide these in half the best that I can. All right, I'm going to try to do this a little bit scientifically. I'm filling this up so I'll have an idea of how many pints of potatoes I'll have. After 3. I think that's about halfway. And I think I did about 8 or 9 pints in this. Now we need to get this on the heat and warm this up. These are going to be my dry canned potatoes, and I need to let them dry a little bit. So I'm going to lay them out inside and let them dry. So remember, we're doing a canning duel. We're doing water canned potatoes and dry canned potatoes, and we're going to see which ones we like best. All right, now these potatoes only need to boil for like 2 minutes, so I need to really watch that when it comes to a boil. Now for the dry canned potatoes, I need to let them dry a little bit. Now we use a lot of trays. I blame this on Philip's Army days. He likes trays, but they do come in handy, I have to admit. So I'm just gonna dump these potatoes out on the trays. So they can dry just a little bit. Now I don't want to leave them sitting out too long. I don't want them to get brown. Now hopefully I have enough rings. I was very intentional when we moved to Kentucky that I made sure we had canning lids, and I had my canning supplies. I knew I had jars up here, but I didn't think about the rings. We have boxes of rings, and I didn't bring any. So I've been scrounging around to find enough rings, and hopefully I have some. If not, I'm taking them off of things in my pantry that I use for dry storage. It's just for a little while. They can come off for a little while. So these are just gonna dry, and then we're gonna move on to that other canning project. So now I need to prepare the clarified butter for the dry potatoes. So I just cut up a stick of butter here. I don't need much because I'm not doing very much. And I'm going to let this cook. We're going to separate the solid parts of the butter from the liquid part of the butter. And and we're going to use that liquid. So now I'm going to fill up the jars with potatoes, and I need to leave an inch of head space. I'm shaking them down a little bit to make up that difference. Now each jar is going to get a half a teaspoon of salt, and this is Redmond's real salt. And then I have some clean water that I warmed up on the stove. This was not in the potato mixture, it's fresh water, and I'm going to fill those up and do my 1 inch of head space. Now you want to be sure to use your bubble tool to get any bubbles out of there, because bubbles will need to work their way out of your mixture. Now the bad part of working outside today is I can feel my jars are cooling down, so I'm trying to do this quickly. And I also went ahead and just turned off the water underneath my pressure canner. I don't want that to get too hot and create temperature shock. Now today I am using my Harvest Guard reusable canning lids. Now I use both kinds of canning lids, but more and more I'm using the reusable because it's more cost efficient. They are a bigger investment up front, but they can be reused, and for the homestead that's a really good way to save money. And I have a complete video on proper technique of using the Harvest Guard canning lids, and I'm going to put it up here. Now they do take a little extra TLC. The rings have been on the heat warming up, and you center them on the lid. And you want to put this on your jar as centered as you possibly can. Now once it's on here, centered, you hold it down with one finger and you turn the ring until the jar turns. Do not over tighten. That is the biggest mistake you can make on causing your lids not to seal. Now it's very tempting to over tighten your lids. Very tempting. It takes a lot of self-control not to, but don't. Now my Presto pressure canner is a double stack canner for pints. You can double stack the lids or the jars just by offsetting each jar and putting them on the rims, but I bought a tray. It's a lot easier that way. And I can just put the tray in and double stack it. It's much simpler for me and worth the investment. I'll be sure to put a link in the description box below. All right, now we're going to bring this up to temperature, let it get boiling, start venting, and we're going to start the pressure canning process. Potatoes need to process for 35 minutes for pint-sized jars. So we're going to let this come up to temperature, and then we'll start the process. So the first batch of potatoes is finally finished, and I turned off the pressure canner. So it's still coming down in temperature so that it's depressurizing it, but I'm going to go ahead and start the dry potatoes now. Now I made clarified butter, but it kind of came out more like ghee. It's a little thicker, definitely has a nutty smell to it, so I hope it doesn't change the flavor of my potatoes too much. I actually ruined the first batch of clarified butter, so this is the second batch, so we're using it no matter what. It smells really good. Now I need to season these potatoes, so I need to put in 2 teaspoons of salt, and a teaspoon of pepper, and these potatoes are mostly dry. I had to dry them a little bit with the paper towels, and you don't want to dry them too soon or they turn brown again, so you have to really watch that, kind of a balancing act, or the right length of time. Now I'm going to go ahead and mix in my ghee. Clarified butter would be more liquidy. And that's what I was aiming for, but it really didn't come out like that. But ghee is also good for high temperature cooking, so I'm not worried about the repercussions of using it in the pressure cooker. Now I did about 1.5 sticks of butter to make this, since I'm not making a lot of potatoes. All right, and now we're going to fill up our jars. I have to tell you, I'm kind of nervous about this. I've never done a Rebel canning method before. Not that I'm aware of, let me just preface with that. If I did, it was completely unintentional. And I am definitely a by-the-book kind of girl, so this makes me nervous. Now I'm going to go ahead and wipe down the rings, I'm going to wipe down the rims just with a dry paper towel. And then I'm going to go back with vinegar. Now I've also prepared the lids properly by heating the seals, and we're gonna put these on exactly as we did the others, centering it up, turning until it just turns. I don't have enough rings. I had to scrounge around to find enough rings to do this. And some of them aren't very good, but they're the best I could find. Okay, these are ready. Let's go get the others out of the canner. Now we do, whenever we pull Harvest Guard canned products out of the canner. We tighten the lids up tight now when we pull them out. We're going to do that right now. Now my canner was struggling because it's so windy out here, so I made kind of a windshield going on over here. So you tighten it up nice and tight when you remove it from the canner, and it stays that way for 24 hours. There's our beautiful canned potatoes. Hot. So now we're going to add our dry canned potatoes to the pressure canner. All right, here we go. The heat is on, and let's see what happens. All right, 35 minutes have passed. This is my dry canning batch. We're gonna let this naturally depressurize, and then we'll see how they came out. I'm so anxious to see, and I can't wait to see which ones we like best. Now we want to tighten down these rings really tight, because remember, we're using the Harvest Guard reusable canning lids. All right, we will check the seals tomorrow and make sure everything's sealed properly, and then we'll find out which one we like best. The ones done in water following the USDA guidelines, or the dry canned potatoes following the Mennonite traditional canning. We'll check it out. Be sure to keep watching. It's been 24 hours since I did my canning duel, and I canned my potatoes using two methods. I did the USDA-approved method, and I did a Rebel canning method used by the Mennonites. Now I know you're eager to see if my Harvest Guard lids have all sealed, so let's check it out. We're going to start with the potatoes that were canned in water, and to check your seals, you just grab a hold and you see if they pull off. Now I always try the lids very carefully, just in case it lifts off. You don't want to drop the jar, so you want to kind of do so cautiously. I think, here we go, here's the last one. So we have 100% seal rate on the jars canned in water following the USDA recommendations. Now let's check out our Rebel canning. Here we go. Now this is using a dry canning method. Whoa, we had one not sealed. So this looks like this is for breakfast. This is gonna go in the refrigerator. Okay, 1 jar left. All right. So 1 jar didn't seal. There's a lot of reasons that might have happened. Maybe this rim has a nick. I don't feel any. Maybe there was a little bit of oil on the top. There's all kinds of reasons, but we'll put this in the fridge. We'll use this up. It's not going to go to waste, but it is important that you always check your seal rate to make sure your jars are properly sealed. All right, so the last part of this experiment will be to tell you which one of the potatoes we like best. So keep watching. Hey friends, it's Barbara Sue, and it's been a couple of months since I recorded the rest of that video. I wanted to give you an update of which method we preferred for preserving our potatoes. Now, the first method that we used is the USDA-approved method, where you preserve potatoes in water. And my cold storage is kind of cold, so this is a little thick. My biggest concern about this method was I was afraid that my potatoes would be mushy, and they weren't. They actually are really nice, and they cook up really easily. Now, the dry canning method that I learned from Ruth Ann Zimmerman is a rebel canning method. It's a Mennonite method, and back in the day, it's probably what everyone did. But as canning methods evolved, it no longer is recommended by the USDA. Now, I actually really like this method, but unfortunately, I think that I prefer the USDA method. Now, let me tell you why. First off, I had one of my jars not seal. That's not a huge issue. And that happens sometimes. But I also had a lid pop off in my pantry. So when I go out into my pantry, I can't get to all my food really easily because we're not completely moved in yet. But I just kind of do a spot check when I do go in the pantry of the jars I can see, and just kind of check their lids. And I did have one more lid pop off. Now, I pulled it in and used it, which is probably not the best idea, but I felt like it was sealed until I pulled it off, so I used it. That concerned me a little bit, enough to not completely trust this method. I want to know that my jars are sealed and will stay sealed. Now, it could be the Harvest Guard lids. I have not actually looked at Harvest Guard's website, but I would almost guarantee that they only endorse approved methods. So it may be that the dry canning is not the best method for their lids. I didn't try this with any metal lids, so I have no cross comparison. I did think that the USDA method was a little bit less labor intensive. Yes, I have to cut up all the potatoes and peel them. But making the ghee, or should have been the clarified butter, is an extra step. And like I said, I messed up the first batch, so I doubled the amount of butter I used to complete it. That's really an added expense that's unnecessary for us here on the homestead. Philip's opinion was that these in the USDA method fried up better. I think that was more technique than anything. He fried his in butter, I fried these in oil, and he does it a lot longer than me, so they were crispier. I'm not sure that was the potatoes, but when given his choice, he preferred these potatoes, and he wasn't sold on either method. He didn't have really any knowledge of the difference in the methods. I just asked him which ones he liked better. Moving forward, I will likely continue with this method, doing them in water, just because I don't need the extra expense. I also don't want to have to worry about my jar lids, which could be completely irrelevant, but it was kind of a deciding factor. Now, I am still a huge fan of Ruth Ann Zimmerman, and I will continue to try recipes that she shares from her Mennonite culture because I find it intriguing of how it has been done in the past. We can't default that sometimes the modern methods have their perks as well. So I think for our purpose, we will continue with this method, and we'll see next year. Maybe I'll do a standoff again next year to see. Well, as always, friends, we appreciate you watching. If you haven't hit that subscribe button yet, hit that button. We'd love you to be a part of the Kowalski Mountain family. Thanks so much for watching. We'll see you next time.